countless articles, and most of them say, you know what, this guy's for real. He'll do it. That too got some press, not a ton, but it got some press. Right after Putin said, keep it up, expand your involvement, and I will nuke you. President Biden asked Congress for another $33 billion in aid to the Ukraine, almost tripling the $13 billion already given. And that too got some press. Friends, listen to the three things that I just said. Putin says, keep it up, escalate further, I will nuke you. Western experts say, hey, this guy isn't kidding. President Biden ramps it up. 1 + 2 + 3 = 6. That, folks, is telling. Do you see this pattern? It's kind of cause and effect. If you do this, I'll do that. Okay, you did this. Now it's my turn. In my opinion, all signs point to a nuclear exchange. In fact, there was a Wall Street Journal op-ed, and by the way, most of this, virtually all of this information for this essay, I obtained from the Wall Street Journal. But there was a Wall Street Journal op-ed by Seth Cropsby. Basically says that the U.S., and it's entitled, Google it, and you can probably read it, the U.S. should show it can win a nuclear war. I'm going to read that again. The title of his essay, the title of his editorial says, the U.S. should show that it can win a nuclear war. And he's not wrong. Now, don't say, well, strong, if there's a nuclear war, nobody's going to win. Okay, everybody says that. And it's wrong. Any war has somebody that wins and somebody that loses. Now, what's an accurate statement is nuclear war will be devastating to the world, to the economy, to the ecology, to everything. But somebody's going to win and somebody's going to lose. That's the way war works. Okay? That's just the way it works. And you think to yourself, well, I'm glad we're not hurting like Russia and the people in Ukraine because we live in the United States, we have a strong economy, and everything's just fine here, right? Did you read the news the other day? Actually, this was Thursday morning I read this. U.S. GDP falls 1.4% as the economy shrinks for the first time since early in the pandemic. What do you mean? The economy shrunk 1.4%? I thought that the economy had grown a lot. Well, it did grow 6.9% fourth quarter of 2021. But fourth quarter 2021, first quarter 2022, it declines. It shrinks 1.4%. What do 2 quarters of shrinking GDP mean? That's right, a recession. Now, the drop stemmed from a widening trade deficit. Imports to the U.S. surged and exports fell. A slower pace of inventory investment by businesses in the first quarter compared with the rapid buildup of inventories at the end of last year also pushed down growth. In addition, fading government stimulus spending related to the pandemic weighed on the GDP. Translation, the government stopped pumping money into the economy, and basically the economy had to stand on its own. And it didn't. Consumer spending, the economy's main driver, heck, it rose 2.7% for the first quarter. That's even faster than it did at the end of last year. Businesses also poured more money into equipment and research and development. 9.2% rise in business spending for the first quarter. Okay, so if the consumer spenders, who make up the biggest part of the economy, if their spending was up 2.7%, if businesses was up 9.2%, then why did the economy shrink? Good question. 2 years after the pandemic struck, the U.S. economy faced challenges, including supply disruptions related to the pandemic and the war in Ukraine, and labor shortages, and high inflation. So spending more doesn't necessarily get you where you need to be. In fact, the labor market, it's the key source of economic strength right now. Jobless claims, the proxy for layoffs, has been at historic lows. High inflation, though, is cutting into household purchasing power. Consumer prices rose 8.5% in March. You say, that's okay, wages are up. Yeah, wages are up. Wages are up 5.6% in the same period. So if you get a 5.6% raise and stuff costs you 8.5% more, friends, you've lost almost 3% of your purchasing power. That's a problem. So what do people do? Well, you got to do one of two things. You either go into debt and continue to spend what you used to spend, or you spend less. That's the only two things you can do. That's how it works. It has to be one or the other. So this war is affecting us, mainly because it's causing the inflation, because it's causing supply chain problems, which if you can't get it, supply and demand says, look, if there's not enough supply to meet the demand, prices go up. So the war is affecting us. Not in death, not in destruction, but it's becoming an economic hardship for us. Russian spokesman saying World War III has begun. That's something else. That's more than just saber rattling. Because if the aggressor in a war makes a statement like that, who am I to refute him? Now, why do I mention this? Well, again, it all has to do with President Biden and what he did earlier this week in response to President Putin's, hey, if you ramp this up, I'll nuke you. So President Biden sent Congress a $33 billion request for more weapons and provided long-term economic assistance to the Ukraine as Russia's military is gradually seizing more territory in the Ukraine. Now, Biden's request came a day after Vladimir Putin vowed a swift response to any greater Western involvement in the conflict. Russian forces have seized villages south of Izium in recent days and are gathering for fresh thrust after Ukraine halted its progress. Ukraine's military said on Thursday. Now, Ukrainian and Western officials and analysts say Moscow's progress is slow and is yet to achieve a decisive breakthrough. U.S. House of Representatives on Thursday approved legislation to create a Lend-Lease agreement designed to speed up the transfer of military equipment to Ukraine. Now, when's the last time we did this? For Great Britain during World War II. The Senate passed this earlier this month. So if the House passes it, Biden will sign it so that Lend-Lease agreement goes into effect. We've not done that since World War II, folks. The Pentagon said on Wednesday that more than half of the 90 howitzers it recently pledged to the Ukraine have been delivered. A Ukrainian presidential advisor said that by the end of May, arms would have arrived in sufficient quantities to change the balance of force on the front. By the middle of June, said the spokesman, we will be ready to go on the attack. The West is funneling arms such as artillery and anti-aircraft guns and ammunition to Ukraine to help it defend itself in a new phase of the war in which heavy weapons are expected to play a more important role. So not just guns and javelins and stingers, folks, howitzers. What do howitzers do? They launch shells a far distance. In other words, they can bomb the Russian convoys. In other words, they can bomb Russia. That's what howitzers can do. The Russia's military has had little success in breaching the defensive line that the Ukraine army set up along the front line of an 8-year conflict with Russian proxies in eastern Ukraine. This war in eastern Russia has been going on for that long. But Russia has made progress striking from Russian territory in the north, where Ukrainian defenses were less prepared. Think about that. Russia has made progress striking from Russian territory in the north. How do you stop those strikes? You strike back into Russian territory. Now, the Russian advances appear aimed at cutting off Ukrainian troops. Another Russian advance further east is attempting to encircle cities in the east and the south. But even if they do surround Ukrainian units, Russian forces will be vulnerable to counterattacks and would have to pursue urban fighting, in which the defenders have a huge advantage. Russia's military surrounded large cities in northern Ukraine in March, but failed to capture them. How is this going to be any different? Now, at a certain point, it is possible, but not inevitable, that Russia will fight. The Russian will to fight will break, I should say. Okay, their will to fight may break. Okay, and a lot of people have been saying this, including me. That might happen. But you got to think how the Russian psyche is. The Russians are a miserable people. They almost embrace being miserable. Consider that Russia lost, how many have they said, depending on the source, they think that anywhere between 15 and 22,000 Russian troops have been killed. That's a lot. But when you consider that Russia lost 26.6 million in World War II, that's a drop in the bucket. Russia lost 26.6 million people in World War II. And Stalin would have kept ramping it up if he had to. That's just how they work. At least that's how they've worked in the past. Maybe they don't work that way anymore. I don't know. But the EU has vowed to continue phasing out purchases of Russian natural gas as well, with Germany now ready to stop buying Russian oil, clearing the way for an EU-wide ban on crude imports from Russia. More on that later. Ukrainian authorities on Thursday filed criminal charges against 10 Russian soldiers accused of taking civilian hostages and mistreating them in Bucha, the first such move by prosecutors investigating possible war crimes. Remember a couple weeks ago I even mentioned they need to put the screws to Russia economically and threaten big-time war crime penalties on the soldiers and the people, the soldiers and the generals? They're doing that. Maybe they listen to the podcast and listen to the strong man. I doubt it. But they're doing that now. And that, my friends, is a recipe for success. That will work. It really will. Now, moving forward, in my opinion, based on the data available and the opinion of most other Western strategists, is that Russia can't win this war. It's impossible. They cannot win. It's not possible. Even if their army overcomes the Ukrainian army, okay, they can't hold the territory, especially with the West backing them. Well, you may say, well, strong, Russia has a big economy. They do. Russia does have a big economy. They have a $1.4 trillion economy. That's what their economy was in 2020, the last year that good records show for their economy, 2020. 1.4 trillion. That's a huge economy. What's the United States economy? 20 trillion. 20 trillion. About 17 times bigger. What's the EU economy? 17 trillion. About 15 times bigger. Not 15, maybe closer to 12. The U.S. plus the EU economy, that's 37 trillion to 1.4 trillion. And forget about the fact that Japan, Korea, Australia, they're also in the game. Add those economies into it. Russia doesn't have a chance. They just don't have a chance. And the screws continue to tighten. Big time. How so? Well, Russia built a self-proclaimed fortress around its economy in the run-up to the war. In fact, they knew this was going to happen. They built their foundation, their fortress, their income stream, and Moscow now depends on foreign middlemen to ferry most of its strategic and lucrative export around the world. That would be oil. Yeah, the dirty little secret is, the Russians pump the oil. They refine the oil, but nearly 100% of that oil is transported and distributed by Western companies.